Now we will discuss rules and principles. This presentation on legal reasoning will be a little bit brief, but it's also a little bit technical. So let's go quickly through it and pay as much attention as we can. Let's start by saying that a rule is not the same thing as a rule formulation. Here you will have three rule formulations that seemingly point towards the same rule. First, it is forbidden to steal. Second, está prohibido robar. And third, the image you see right there. It seems intuitively correct to say that these are three formulations of the same rule. And this points to the fact that rules are not essentially linguistic entities. Rules are supralinguistic things and not words. A corollary of this is that if rules are supralinguistic, they are known after interpretation. So interpretation is the techniques we use to try to straighten out a communication, to see what is the meaning of that communication. Well, we put rules in the place of meaning. We put it as the output of this process of interpretation. So we could see some communication, it goes into the box of interpretation, and the output of that is the rules. This is why we distinguish in a prior lecture of two different things: discussions of interpretations and conflict of rules. And we say that conflict of rules need to be solved assuming that the rules actually conflict, that we have interpreted them correctly, that we have gotten their true meaning, and then the meaning is A and not A, then we have a conflict of rules. It is very fortunate that we can put interpretation in this box in the middle and separate it from the rules, because it happens in practice that interpretation is a bit of a black box. It's very difficult to understand really what interpretation is. So it's good to be able to operate at the level of rules while keeping interpretation under tabs. So when you look at rules specifically, it is very common to see them as a bit of a machine, where you input certain conditions, the rule will give you a certain consequence or status. So let's say here we have the rule, and it has this opening here, and it has this pipe over here where the output goes, and you have this as the rule, let's call it R. Then you input a certain factual condition, the rule will give you out on the other side a certain consequence or status Y. That's typically how you will see rules, and I will provide examples of that. So now let's say we have a rule called it's forbidden to steal. That is a textual formulation. Ultimately, what lies behind it is the prohibition of stealing. Well, what this does essentially is that it takes a sort of factual circumstance, let's call this one X, which is a case of theft, and it comes out on the other side with the outcome that it assigns a status to it that it's forbidden. So let's call that Fx. The notation here, do not take it too strictly. It's a little bit improvised, it's not like really math. And then of course, if you come up with some other factual circumstance x2, which is not a case of theft, if somebody, for example, walking on the grass, then it goes into the rule, and the rule comes out with the consequence that it's not forbidden to x2 because that's not theft. So there you see the rule operating like a machine, and the rule simply assigns statuses in this scenario to the factual conditions that you present to it. These statuses are very common in law to say that something is forbidden, prohibited, or required. These are usually called the deontic statuses, and we should not feel the need to go too much into detail about those. But of course, the law might also not just assign statuses, the law might actually assign consequences. So a little bit more realistically, we will not have a law that says it's forbidden to steal. We will rather have a law that he who steals goes for 5 months to prison. And then what's going to happen is exactly the same that you saw before. So here we have a case of stealing, it goes into the rule, and it assigns to it Now the consequence, which is that the person who steals get a prison term. It's quite possible to understand this consequence also in terms of statuses. For example, say that the person who steals is permitted to go to prison or it's required to go to prison, but that is an unnecessary complication for now. It's attributed to the American philosopher Ronald Dworkin the discovery that law does not only have rules, but also principles. Principles can be understood as values that guide decision making. Examples of principles would be, for example, equality, which is a principle that pervades the law, or the principle of the best interest of the child that arises when you look at the child from a human rights perspective. Something like equality or the best interest of the child does not appear to be a rule because it does not fulfill the description that we just made of rules, of these machines that take up a certain factual scenario and attach consequences or statuses to it. If we consider something like equality, it's not catching any specific factual situation and it's not assigning any specific consequence. It's more of a value that says, well, when you apply the rules, if there's any difficulty or if there's any problem in applying them or any uncertainty or vagueness in applying them, as much as possible, try to reach the more equal result. Or all things being equal, take the more equal result. Same thing for the best interest of the child. When you apply the rules on children, all things being equal, interpret them and apply them, or where the rules are unclear, do whatever is in the best interest of the child. For an example of principles, consider a divorce, and the question is who should retain custody of the children, parent A or parent B? Now, let's say, strictly speaking, the rules do not settle this issue. The rules may prohibit the judge to give custody to the children to an abusive parent, but they will not make a choice between, let's say, two parents that are competent and are within the boundaries of the law. Still, it could be that the judge must take a choice, and then he could ask a different question, whether parent A or parent B is for the best interest of the child. Now, the law will not say, for example, that the parent who the child is more attached to is the parent for which who should retain custody of the children. The law cannot say something as specific as that. That is something that will require very contextual judgment. So now where the rule gives you an opening, the rule says, okay, in principle, you must assign custody to parent A or parent B. We could say it's permitted for parent A or for parent B to take the custody of the children. The principle may say the judge must pick of these two parents whichever is for the better interest of the child. And then he can assess things contextually and say, given the attachment of the child for B, I think the child should be under the custody of B. So that would be an example of how principles work. And you see that you do not, when you think of something like best interest of the child, you do not have a fixed condition and a fixed consequence. It's just something that you apply contextually when the rules give you space for it. And it's actually quite possible to put rules and principles together in a single schema. Now imagine this black canvas right here is our decision space. We can take decisions here, 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 or anywhere else when we are unconstrained by law. We can imagine rules something like a box. Rules will divide the decision space in such a way that, for example, it's prohibited to make a decision outside the box. So that's, or the dots are now going to be in red because that's the prohibited sign. It's required to make a decision within the box. So you must stay within the box. Whatever decision must go within the box. So those are the green dots. But it's also permitted to make different decisions as long as you are within the box. So here, all the points in green, you see that permission allows you many different possibilities. It's prohibited to be outside, it's required to be inside, but then inside the box, it's permitted to make decisions, let's say, in this corner or in that corner over there. Once you have this graphic of decision space, you can also add principles on top of them. And principles can be understood as vectors of force that say, all things being equal, for example, take decisions that go as much as possible to the upper right corner. And then you could say, well, as a matter of rules, I have discretion. I am permitted to make decisions all over this box. But for example, the best interest of the child means that ideally between this green dot over here and this green dot over here, I should take the decision that is as close as possible to this upper right corner. Okay, that of course is just a schematic way of thinking about this, of putting it all together in a way that's visual.